Think you know everything about Sylvester Stallone and Antonio Banderas playing deadly rivals? From million-dollar scripts that creators tried to disown to cats who became action movie stars across multiple films, this thriller hides secrets that are stranger than any assassination plot. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about assassins. Fact 1. The Wachowski disownment disaster. In one of the most dramatic behind-the-scenes conflicts in 1990s Hollywood, the creators of The Matrix tried to completely distance themselves from assassins before it even hit theaters. The Wachowski sisters, who were then known as Larry and Andy Wachowski, had written what they considered a dark and complex thriller about moral universes and professional killers. However, their vision clashed immediately with director Richard Donner, who wanted something much more straightforward and commercial. The conflict began when Donner brought in screenwriter Brian Helgeland to do what the industry calls a page one rewrite, meaning he started completely over, rather than just making adjustments. The Wachowskis watched helplessly as their carefully crafted script was transformed into something they barely recognized. In the original version, Stallone's character was a genuinely cold-blooded killer who executed his mentor without hesitation. Donner changed this so the mentor essentially killed himself, because he felt audiences wouldn't connect with such a dark protagonist. The sisters were so disgusted with the final result that they petitioned the Writers Guild of America to remove their names from the credits entirely. This is an extremely rare move in Hollywood, typically reserved for writers who feel their work has been completely butchered. Unfortunately for them, the Guild refused their request because too much of the original structure remained intact, even after Helgeland's extensive changes. Years later, the Wachowskis revealed that this traumatic experience fundamentally changed their career trajectory. As Lily Wachowski explained in interviews, they realized they would never survive as writers in this town if they couldn't control their own material. This led them to pursue directing, starting with Bound in 1996, which gave them the creative control they desperately wanted. The painful lesson from Assassins directly motivated them to become the visionary filmmakers behind the Matrix trilogy, making their initial failure a crucial stepping stone to their later success. Fact 2. Mel Gibson's 10-24-hour deal. Before Assassins became a Hollywood production nightmare, it caught the attention of one of the biggest movie stars of the 1990s in the most unusual way possible. Mel Gibson, fresh off his success with films like Mad Max and Lethal Weapon, somehow got his hands on the Wachowski sisters' original script and was immediately impressed by what he read. However, instead of committing to the project right away, Gibson made an offer that was both generous and oddly specific. He paid the struggling young writers $10,000 for what's called a 24-hour option, which gave him exactly 1 day to decide whether he wanted to move forward with the project. For the Wachowskis, who were still relatively unknown in Hollywood and working various odd jobs to pay their bills, this sudden windfall felt like winning the lottery. In later interviews, they joked about their reaction to receiving the check, with one of them saying they thought they could retire for years on that amount of money. The sisters were so excited about the unexpected payday that they genuinely believed they wouldn't need to work for an extended period. This reveals just how financially precarious their situation was at the time, when $10,000 seemed like enough money to live on indefinitely. Their innocent excitement about what most established Hollywood writers would consider a modest option payment shows how new they were to the industry. After his 24 hours were up, Gibson ultimately decided to pass on Assassins, choosing instead to focus his energy and resources on developing Braveheart, which would go on to win him Academy Awards for Best Picture and Best Director in 1996. While Gibson's decision was undoubtedly the right one for his career, it meant the Assassin's script continued bouncing around Hollywood until it eventually landed with Richard Donner and became the troubled production that would teach the Wachowskis some harsh lessons about the film industry. Fact 3. The Matrix $1 million twin sale. In what might be the most incredible coincidence in screenwriting history, legendary producer Joel Silver simultaneously purchased 2 scripts from the same writers for exactly $1 million each, creating one of the most expensive double deals ever made with unknown screenwriters. Silver, who had produced blockbusters like Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, was apparently so impressed with the Wachowski sisters' work that he decided to invest heavily in their future, even though they had never had a major film produced before. The timing of these purchases was remarkable because it meant the Wachowskis went from struggling writers barely making ends meet to instant millionaires practically overnight. After years of working odd jobs and writing spec scripts that nobody wanted, they suddenly found themselves with $2 million in the bank from a single producer who believed in their vision. This massive financial windfall came at almost the exact same time, making it one of the most dramatic career transformations in Hollywood history. What makes this story even more fascinating is that Silver was essentially betting on two completely different types of movies from the same writing team. Assassins was a relatively straightforward action thriller about competing hitmen, while The Matrix was a mind-bending science fiction story about virtual reality and the nature of existence. The fact that Silver saw enough potential in both scripts to pay such enormous sums shows just how impressed he was with the range and creativity of the Wachowski sisters' writing. Of course, we now know that The Matrix would go on to become a cultural phenomenon and one of the most influential films ever made, while Assassins would become a box office disappointment that the writers themselves tried to disown. However, at the time Silver made these purchases, both scripts were just potential projects on paper, making his simultaneous million-dollar investments an incredibly bold move that would ultimately change the trajectory of cinema history. Fact 4. Pearl the Cat's secret identity. One of the most surprising connections between Sylvester Stallone movies involves a four-legged performer who managed to land back-to-back roles with the action star. The beautiful Maine Coon cat that plays Elektra's beloved companion Pearl in Assassins was actually the same feline actor that appeared in Stallone's previous film, The Specialist, released just 1 year earlier in 1994. This makes Pearl one of the very few actors, human or otherwise, to work with Stallone in consecutive film projects. While Pearl is officially credited in Assassins as playing herself, her distinctive appearance and markings are virtually identical to the cat that appeared alongside Stallone and Sharon Stone in The Specialist. The connection becomes even more obvious when you consider that both films shared the same head animal trainer, Mark Echevarria, who had previously worked on Disney's remake of That Darn Cat. This suggests that Pearl, or possibly a cat from the same training team, had become something of a specialist in working with major Hollywood productions. In Assassins, Pearl plays a crucial role as more than just a pet, serving as both Elektra's emotional anchor and a plot device that helps drive the story forward. When Elektra has to flee quickly and leaves Pearl behind, Stallone's character Robert Rath uses the cat to track down Elektra's home by visiting her favorite pet store. The cat even travels with the main characters to Puerto Rico, appearing in numerous scenes throughout the film until disappearing from the story during the final 30 minutes. What makes Pearl's Hollywood career even more remarkable is that she may have actually been a cat actor named Elvis, who was known for working on multiple major productions during the mid-1990s. Whether Pearl and Elvis were the same cat or simply part of the same professional animal acting team, this feline performer clearly had better job security than many human actors in Hollywood during that era. Fact 5. The Carnivore Cannibal Script. Before the Wachowski sisters became known for complex science fiction stories, they wrote what might be one of the most disturbing scripts ever pitched in Hollywood, a twisted social satire that was so extreme it couldn't find a single studio willing to touch it. Their first screenplay, titled Carnivore, told the story of a cannibalistic soup kitchen that literally served the rich to the poor, creating a darkly comic take on class warfare and economic inequality that was apparently too shocking, even for 1990s Hollywood. The script was written as the Wachowskis' debut attempt at breaking into the film industry, representing their earliest vision of what kind of stories they wanted to tell on the big screen. While specific plot details remain scarce since the script was never produced, the basic premise involved people running a soup kitchen that fed homeless and impoverished individuals by cooking and serving wealthy victims. This grotesque concept was apparently meant as a satirical commentary on how the rich exploit the poor, taken to its most literal and horrifying extreme. Despite generating significant interest from various Hollywood contacts, Carnivore was universally rejected by every studio that read it. The Wachowskis later acknowledged that the script was considered too weird for mainstream audiences, which is quite an accomplishment considering some of the bizarre films that actually did get made during that era. The complete failure to sell this first script taught them valuable lessons about the boundaries of what Hollywood would accept, even from unknown writers willing to work for relatively little money. The rejection of Carnivore directly led the sisters to write Assassins as their second attempt, choosing a more conventional action thriller format that would be easier for studios to understand and market. While Assassins would eventually become its own kind of disaster for the Wachowskis, At least it actually got produced and released, unlike their cannibalistic debut that remains one of Hollywood's most notorious unproduced screenplays from the decade. Fact 6. The composer replacement crisis. The musical score for Assassins became a last-minute scramble that resulted in one of the most rushed composing jobs in Hollywood history, creating a soundtrack that sounds remarkably similar to another major action film from the same era. Originally, the producers hired Michael Kamen, the legendary composer behind scores for films like Die Hard, Lethal Weapon, and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, to create the music for their assassin thriller. Kamen was known for his ability to craft memorable themes, and had already established himself as one of the go-to composers for action movies in the 1990s. However, something went wrong during the production process, and Kamen was suddenly replaced by Mark Mancina, who had recently gained attention for his work on the high-speed thriller Speed in 1994. The timing of this replacement was so problematic that Mancina found himself in an almost impossible situation, having to compose an entire film score with virtually no time for the careful planning and development that usually goes into creating movie music. Because of the extreme time constraints, Mancina was unable to develop a distinctive main theme for Assassins, which is typically one of the most important elements of any film score. Instead, he had to rely on musical techniques and styles that he had already perfected while working on Speed, resulting in a soundtrack that bears a striking resemblance to his earlier work. Anyone familiar with both films can immediately hear the similarities in the musical approach, rhythm patterns, and overall sound design. This rushed composing process explains why the Assassin's score feels somewhat generic and forgettable compared to other action films of the era. While Mancina is a talented composer who has created memorable music for many successful films, the circumstances surrounding Assassins simply didn't allow him the time needed to craft something truly original and distinctive for the project. Fact 7. The original sexless rewrite. One of the most significant changes Richard Donner made to the Wachowski sisters' original script involved completely eliminating what was supposed to be a central romantic storyline between the two main characters. In the original version that the writers had crafted, Stallone's character Robert Rath was meant to have a passionate and intense love affair with Julianne Moore's computer hacker Elektra, including what was described as an animalistic hotel room scene that would have been a major emotional turning point in the story. Donner made the deliberate decision to remove almost all of this romantic content because he believed the main character needed to be what he specifically called sexless in order for audiences to properly connect with him. The director felt that having Rath engage in a passionate relationship would somehow make him less sympathetic or relatable as a protagonist, despite the fact that he was already playing a professional killer for hire. This creative choice meant that one of the most humanizing aspects of the character was stripped away during the rewriting process. The dramatic reduction in romantic content is clearly visible in the final film, where the relationship between Rath and Elektra feels oddly distant and underdeveloped, despite the actor's best efforts to create chemistry. What was originally meant to be a night of passion and emotional connection was reduced to nothing more than a brief, almost awkward kiss, leaving viewers with little sense of why these two characters would risk everything for each other. Some remnants of the original romantic storyline can still be found in the movie's trailer, which includes footage of Elektra telling Rath, "You're a strange man, Robert Rath," before they embrace and kiss. However, this scene and the deeper emotional connection it represented were completely removed from the theatrical release, leaving behind a much more sterile and emotionally hollow relationship that fails to provide the human stakes the story desperately needed. Fact 8. Trailer scenes that never existed. Assassins became one of those movies where watching the trailer actually gives you a completely different experience than seeing the actual film, because numerous scenes that were heavily featured in the promotional materials were completely cut from the theatrical release. This created a frustrating situation for moviegoers who went to theaters expecting to see specific moments that had been prominently advertised but simply didn't exist in the finished product. One of the most notable missing scenes involves Stallone's character Robert Rath walking down a street and stopping at a store window where he witnesses someone stealing a dress. In this deleted sequence, Rath intervenes to stop the theft, then talks with the female store clerk and pretends he wants to buy the dress for his wife or girlfriend because they supposedly had a fight. The scene ends with Rath leaving a large stack of $100 bills in the clerk's textbook before walking away, showing a softer side of his character that never made it to the final cut. Another significant trailer scene that disappeared involved an extended introduction for Antonio Banderas' character Miguel Bain at the cemetery. In this version, a cemetery caretaker approaches Bain and asks if he needs help finding something. When Bain responds that he's looking for someone, the helpful caretaker offers to check the plot map, assuming Bain is searching for a specific grave. Bain then delivers the chilling line, "He's not dead yet," implying that he's actually hunting his next victim, rather than mourning someone who's already buried. The trailer also included dialogue from the removed love scene between Rath and Elektra, where she tells him, "You're a strange man, Robert Rath," before they embrace and kiss. Additionally, when Bain recognizes Rath in the taxi, the trailer shows him saying "surprise" instead of the Spanish phrase that appears in the final film. And there's a moment where Bain aims at children playing soccer while saying "moving target." That was completely removed. Fact 9. The Puerto Rico passport plot hole. One of the most glaring geographical mistakes in Assassins occurs when the characters prepare to travel from the mainland United States to Puerto Rico, revealing that the screenwriters apparently didn't understand basic facts about American territories. In the film, Robert Rath asks Elektra if she has a passport before they make their trip to the island, treating Puerto Rico as if it were a foreign country that would require international travel documents for entry. This dialogue creates an embarrassing plot hole because Puerto Rico has been a United States territory since 1898, which means American citizens can travel there using the same identification they would need for any domestic flight within the continental United States. Puerto Ricans are American citizens by birth. The island uses the US dollar as its currency, and the Postal Service operates under the same system as any other American state or territory. Asking about passport requirements for Puerto Rico is essentially the same as asking if you need a passport to fly from New York to California. The mistake becomes even more puzzling when you consider that this wasn't just a throwaway line of dialogue, but rather a deliberate plot point that was written into the script and then spoken by professional actors who presumably read through their lines multiple times during rehearsals and filming. It's the kind of error that suggests nobody involved in the production process, from the writers to the director to the actors themselves, bothered to verify this basic geographical fact before including it in the final screenplay. This passport error is particularly noticeable because the film actually was shot on location in Puerto Rico, meaning the cast and crew had first-hand experience traveling to the island for production purposes. The fact that they went through the actual process of traveling to Puerto Rico to film the movie, yet still included dialogue suggesting it requires international travel documents, makes this mistake even more baffling and inexcusable than it would have been otherwise. Fact 10. The impossible 16 million briefcase. The climactic scenes of Assassins revolve around a briefcase that supposedly contains $16 million in cash, but simple mathematics reveals that this prop represents one of the most physically impossible objects ever featured in an action movie. According to the film's plot, Robert Rath successfully retrieves this massive payment from a Puerto Rican bank and then carries it around during the final confrontation with his enemies, treating it as if it were a normal suitcase that any person could reasonably handle. The problem becomes obvious when you calculate the actual weight of $16 million in cash using the largest bills that were commonly available in 1995. $100 bills, which represent the highest denomination in regular circulation, weigh approximately 1 gram each, which means that $1 million in hundreds weighs about 22 pounds. This means $16 million in cash would weigh approximately 352 pounds, making it roughly equivalent to carrying around a large motorcycle or a small piano. The sheer absurdity of this weight becomes even more apparent when you watch Stallone's character not only lifting and carrying this briefcase, but actually running with it during chase sequences and action scenes. Even if Rath were strong enough to deadlift 352 pounds, which would be impressive for any person, the idea that he could sprint while carrying this amount of weight is completely ridiculous and defies basic physics and human capabilities. This mistake reveals that the filmmakers either never bothered to research the actual weight of large amounts of cash or simply assumed that audiences wouldn't think too hard about the logistics of their plot device. In reality, $16 million would require either a much larger container, like a shipping crate, or would need to be transferred electronically rather than physically transported in a single briefcase that one person could carry around like a normal piece of luggage. Fact 11. The cemetery filming choice. The opening funeral shootout scene in Assassins, where Stallone and Banderas first encounter each other as rival assassins, was filmed at a location that was specifically chosen for its visual appeal rather than its convenience or proximity to the main production. While most of the movie was shot in and around Seattle, Washington, the filmmakers decided to travel north to Evergreen Cemetery in Everett for this crucial early scene that establishes the deadly competition between the two main characters. Location manager Patricia Fay, who worked for the production company, was responsible for scouting potential cemetery locations throughout the Seattle area for this important sequence. She initially considered at least 2 other cemeteries within Seattle itself, which would have been much more convenient for the cast and crew since they wouldn't have required additional travel time or transportation logistics. However, after visiting multiple sites and evaluating their cinematic potential, Fay ultimately recommended Evergreen Cemetery despite its less convenient location. The deciding factor in choosing Evergreen Cemetery was what Fay described as its more visually interesting landscape compared to the other options they had considered. The cemetery offered a diverse terrain with numerous mature trees, rolling hillsides, and varied topography that would provide better opportunities for dramatic camera angles and more dynamic action sequences. These natural features gave the cinematographer and director more options for staging the gunfight and chase scene that needed to look exciting and cinematic rather than flat or boring. The choice proved to be worthwhile from a production standpoint, as the cemetery's varied landscape allowed the filmmakers to create a more visually compelling sequence, with multiple levels and hiding spots among the trees and monuments. The additional travel time and logistical complexity of filming outside of Seattle was apparently justified by the superior visual results they were able to achieve at this particular location in Everett. Fact 12. The fingerprint professional problem. One of the most glaring professional mistakes that runs throughout the entire film involves the complete absence of basic crime scene precautions that any real assassin would consider absolutely essential for survival. Despite being portrayed as the world's #1 and #2 professional killers, both Robert Rath and Miguel Bain consistently failed to wear gloves during their various assassination attempts and criminal activities, leaving their fingerprints all over weapons, door handles, surfaces, and other evidence at multiple crime scenes throughout the movie. This oversight becomes particularly absurd when you consider that these characters are supposed to be elite professionals who have successfully operated in the assassination business for years without being caught by law enforcement. In reality, any criminal who leaves fingerprints at crime scenes would be quickly identified and arrested, especially someone involved in high-profile murders that would attract serious police investigation and forensic analysis. The fact that both assassins repeatedly handle guns, touch objects, and move through various locations without any attempt to conceal their fingerprints suggests they have somehow managed to build their legendary reputations while completely ignoring one of the most basic rules of criminal activity. The problem is made even more obvious by the fact that both characters are shown to be meticulous and careful in other aspects of their work, planning elaborate setups, and demonstrating sophisticated knowledge of weapons and tactics. Yet they apparently never learned the simple precaution of wearing gloves, which would cost virtually nothing and require no special skills or training to implement effectively. This fingerprint oversight appears in scene after scene, from the opening cemetery confrontation through various hotel encounters and apartment shootouts, creating a consistent pattern of unrealistic behavior that undermines the credibility of these supposedly professional characters. The filmmakers apparently prioritized showing the actors' hands and facial expressions over maintaining any sense of realistic criminal procedure. Fact 13. The Razzie nomination loss. Sylvester Stallone's performance in Assassins was considered so poor by critics that it earned him a nomination for one of Hollywood's most infamous awards, the Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Actor of 1995. However, what makes this nomination particularly interesting is that Stallone wasn't just recognized for his work in Assassins alone, but received the dubious honor for a double feature of disappointing performances that year, since the nomination also included his role in the science fiction disaster Judge Dredd. The Golden Raspberry Awards, commonly known as the Razzies, were created in 1980 as a parody of the Academy Awards to specifically highlight the worst achievements in film each year. Getting nominated for a Razzie is generally considered an embarrassment for actors and filmmakers, representing the opposite of the prestige that comes with an Oscar nomination. The fact that Stallone managed to earn this nomination for 2 separate films in the same year suggests that 1995 was a particularly challenging period in his career. Despite being nominated for what many considered to be genuinely terrible performances in both Assassins and Judge Dredd, Stallone ultimately did not win the Worst Actor Razzie that year. Instead, the award went to comedian Pauly Shore for his performance in Jury Duty, a legal comedy that was apparently considered even worse than Stallone's double dose of critical failures. Shore was known for his distinctive comedic style that had become popular in the early 1990s, but Jury Duty represented a career low point that even surpassed Stallone's widely criticized action movie performances. The fact that Stallone lost this particular award to Pauly Shore says something significant about just how badly Jury Duty was received by audiences and critics, since it had to be worse than two major studio action films starring one of the biggest movie stars of the 1980s and 90s. Fact 14. The Day of the Dead deception. The climactic scenes of Assassins create a clever geographical illusion that most viewers never notice, using one Caribbean location to stand in for an entirely different country during the film's final act. While the majority of the movie was filmed in the Pacific Northwest, specifically in the Seattle-Tacoma-Everett metropolitan area of Washington state, the dramatic ending sequences were shot thousands of miles away in San Juan, Puerto Rico, which was used to represent Mexico for the story's conclusion. The most visually striking element of these final scenes involves a colorful Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, procession that fills the streets as the main characters navigate their final confrontation. This traditional Mexican celebration, which honors deceased family members and friends, provided a vibrant and culturally rich backdrop for the movie's climax, with elaborate costumes, decorative skulls, and festive crowds creating a dramatic contrast to the deadly serious business happening between the assassins. However, the Day of the Dead parade that appears so prominently in these scenes was not actually filmed in Mexico at all, but rather in the historic streets of San Juan, Puerto Rico's capital city. The production team chose Puerto Rico as a filming location because it offered several practical advantages, including proximity to the United States, favorable tax incentives for film production, and the ability to create an authentic-looking Latin American atmosphere without the logistical complications of filming in a foreign country. The specific locations used in San Juan included the historic Antigua Casino building on Avenida Juan Ponce de Leon, which served as the exterior of the bank where the final money exchange takes place, and various streets in the old colonial section of the city. The production successfully transformed these Puerto Rican locations into a convincing Mexican setting, complete with the Day of the Dead celebration that adds both visual spectacle and cultural authenticity to the film's dramatic conclusion. Fact 15. The role reversal regret. Years after Assassins was released to disappointing box office results and harsh critical reviews, director Richard Donner made a surprising admission about one of the fundamental casting decisions that shaped the entire film. In retrospective interviews, Donner revealed that he believed the movie would have been significantly more successful if Sylvester Stallone and Antonio Banderas had switched their roles completely, with Stallone playing the younger, more aggressive assassin Miguel Bain and Banderas taking on the part of the older, world-weary Robert Rath who wants to retire from the killing business. This potential role reversal would have created a fascinating alternative version of the story, since it would have played against both actors' established screen personas in interesting ways. Stallone was known for playing intense, physical characters who often used brute force and determination to overcome obstacles, which would have been a perfect fit for the unhinged and psychotic Miguel Bain character. Meanwhile, Banderas had already demonstrated his ability to portray more sophisticated and nuanced characters in films like The Mask of Zorro, suggesting he could have brought a different kind of depth to the conflicted veteran assassin role. Despite expressing this regret about the casting choices, Donner was careful to praise both actors for their actual performances in the roles they ultimately played. He specifically highlighted Stallone's more restrained and understated approach to Robert Rath, noting that the actor had successfully found the character and committed to a quieter, more introspective performance than audiences typically expected from him. Donner also praised Banderas for his energetic and memorable portrayal of the volatile Miguel Bain, acknowledging that the Spanish actor had brought considerable charisma and intensity to what could have been a one-dimensional villain role. Donner's comments suggest that while he remained proud of the work both actors delivered, he wondered whether different casting choices might have resulted in a more commercially successful and critically acclaimed film.